morning. Welcome to the session. I'm glad everybody found this room sort of tucked around the corner. I'm Pam Dickens. I'm the head of collections and content at the University of Alberta Library. I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Samuel Cassidy from Western University. Denise is unfortunately run into some flight delays, so she couldn't make it to this presentation. She has one this afternoon I'm hoping she'll make it to. So I'll hit some of the highlights from Denise's slides, but she'd be happy to respond to emails or any questions that you might have for her. So today's topic, we're talking about strategic restructuring, staffing collections for an evolving scholarly landscape. We've all recently done some reorganizing around our collections work, so we're going to speak to that. So we're 3 academic libraries in Canada, 2 in Ontario, 1 in Alberta. And we've all started at different stages along the path of sort of changing our traditional way of doing collections. So I'll speak first, then I'll speak a little bit to Denise's slides, and then Samuel will discuss his experience at Western, and then we'll just do a summary of the common themes, and we hope to have time for questions at the end. So keep your questions in your mind, and we'll address them at the end. Is probably the best way to go to make sure we make it through the session. So I mentioned I'm from the University of Guelph Library. This is the Guelph Griffin, as you can see here. Guelph's a research-intensive university. We have about 28,000 students. We're located about 60 miles west of Toronto. We have just 1 main library, so we don't have any professional schools aside from veterinary school. So we have no branch libraries, and our library is right in the center of campus. It's a real hub, and it's about 93% of the study space on campus is in our library, so you probably can deduce what that means for collections. In 2008, the University of Guelph did a complete organizational review, and as a result, in 2009, 5 strategic teams were formed based on functional aspects. And one of those 5 teams was the Information Resources team, which we recently renamed Collections and Content. So this is the organization chart of when the team was formed, and also when I started there in 2012. It's probably hard to read, but it has the head of Information Resources, the manager of acquisitions and collection maintenance support staff, a media resources specialist, which was a professional position, and then 4, we call them IR, Information Resources Librarians, in 4 broad disciplines. So 1 for arts and humanities, 1 for social sciences and business, 1 for life sciences, which was a position I was hired into in 2012, and 1 for physical sciences and engineering. There was a real big change at the library at the time. We were moving from a liaison model into this model, so it was really a huge sea change, and there was a lot of time that it took in order to settle into the different strategic teams. I should mention that there's a steering team within this, which is all the professional staff and librarians. So in this case, it was all the folks in these two rows. When I joined the team, we were talking a little bit, we'd gone through sort of the storming and norming phase and had sort of settled into it. And we had talked a lot about the benefits of the team and some of the challenges we still faced in 2013. One of the main benefits was that it was a much more holistic view of collection development. So people were, that might have been doing a small area or a few departments were doing much broader based. And they were also starting to recognize a lot of interdisciplinary and connections to other schools and different disciplines. That also allowed for budget consolidations and flexibility, so we could direct budget dollars where we needed, and people weren't necessarily just fighting for their department. There was much less territoriality when we had money for new resources, whether it was base or one-time only, which we did for a while. It was quite a very collegial way of making those decisions, which was great. And I think it was a more informed decision because everybody was aware. There was also a lot of peer learning among people, the collections librarians in particular. And there was also a stronger sense of understanding the acquisitions workflow and the media workflow because those professionals were also part of the steering team. On the downside, there was less interaction with users. As a liaison librarian, you're out there doing information literacy, you're working on the help desk, so you had a lot more connection with students. We still had connections with faculty in terms of requests, but it wasn't really the same, so there was a sense of being distant or removed from our users and our stakeholders in that respect. The strategic teams that were formed, there was another team called Discovery and Access, that's where the e-resources team was, and circulation. There was another team, Learning and Curriculum Support, which is where the information literacy happened. And the workflows across those teams were not very strong, and we had created some cross-functional teams in order to bridge those gaps, but they really had limited success. So that was one of the biggest challenges, was being able to communicate within the library and beyond. In terms of buying resources and making those known to people, that was also, we didn't really have workflows in place to communicate that. It had really happened more informally through the liaison role, where you're out there, talking to people and promoting those resources, and those workflows didn't quite exist in the new structure. We also found that what people were doing was really focusing still on the beginning parts of the life cycle. So really focusing on collection development and acquisitions, but not so much on collection management and weeding and making the access available on that piece as well. And that was quite challenging. So in a way, what people were doing, and I think this is a real natural evolution, they were being a liaison librarian but for more areas and not doing the teaching and not doing the reference help work, but they were doing more areas in collection development. So this started to change as we adjusted our workflows. So we renamed the team Collections and Content, I think in 2016. But in 2014, we added the e-resources management team to the team because we had a lot of problems where the collections librarians were buying large swaths of content and that wasn't made available. And there was a lot of miscommunication and some tension created out of that. We also had staffing challenges in the e-resources area, the management and metadata area. So we brought that into the collections strategic team and also added a manager, and I became the manager of e-resources and metadata at that time. And so we started to talk about workflows and understand where the communications gap were. In 2017, so about a year and a half ago, we included our e-learning and reserves team. That is the team that puts on physical reserves, but a lot of electronic reserves, and also buys copyright permissions for a lot of the coursework. The manager of that team was also our copyright officer and had tremendous licensing knowledge, so it was really a natural fit. And through this strategic team that now included these managers and librarians, it really did help to include broader perspectives and a better sense of other collections, such as the curriculum collection, but also different perspectives on the access. In the meantime, we underwent major renovations where we closed 2 floors of the library and we created new space. Is this sounding familiar to anyone? So we created more learning space, group study, study seats, media lab, a scholar studio, a new reading room, and an exhibit space. So we took a lot of room out of collections. So we needed to manage projects, and we hadn't really built that in our workflow. We had for many years had the sense we're a research library and we have to buy everything. So that's always, and we weren't so good about the reading piece. And what we were doing was always reactive. We're going to put something here, you have to move all those collections. And you have to do it by this deadline. So it wasn't really built into the workflow. So we ended up hiring on contract a collections management projects librarian, which is why this little piece is over here. And the collection management staff moved from acquisitions to that person. So we have that person for another year. We're still moving through the projects from the renovation and new ones. But we're going to need to solve this in the long run. Part of our idea is that we will just build in automatic management as we go. So if we buy a new edition, we look at that. I mean, some of this is basic stuff, but we've never done it where we are. And look about, thinking about ways in which to do that. So that's one of our challenges going forward. I think another challenge is assessment. We really had worked a lot on quality assurance assessment for programs and new courses, cyclical reviews of programs, but we hadn't done a lot of evidence-based assessment, looking at what we'd already purchased and whether it was still the best value for money, and is there something else we could get instead, and we really started to build that expertise over time. So addressing some of the challenges we had, we did some of that by giving portfolios to the collections librarians. When I moved from the collections librarian for life sciences, we consolidated that position into being just one collections librarian for all of science and engineering, recognizing that that universe of publication is not as large or as complex as in the College of Arts or social sciences and humanities, and that a lot of it was covered by our consortial big deals. So now and also the media specialist retired. So the collections librarian for arts and humanities became the media specialist in a way and does a lot of work with streaming media, which is absolutely blown up and has taken a lot of her time. And we're still working on some of those workflows. The collections librarian for social sciences and business has retired. We have someone new, and they're taking on the communications portfolio. So that's communicating our collections out. We have a fabulous communications department. So a lot of it's there. We could go out and do this stuff, but we just haven't had dedicated space and made it part of somebody's job to do that. Our collections librarian for sciences has a real bent for analysis and assessment, so he's taking on that role and providing leadership in that way. So we've developed portfolios. It's kind of an ongoing thing, and we'll see how that works. As a manager of the team, I'm always very, very conscious of workload and overwhelming people, and it's hard when you have 3 collections librarians for, a research library. So we're always working that out and trying to find efficiencies for the way that we do things, moving away from title by title selection, moving towards more effective ways of doing things without losing the quality. So you can imagine that's a challenge as well. So some of the things that have enabled us through this process, one is the Terms 2.0 framework, and I don't know if anybody knows about this. If you're in the e-resources realm, you might. This is techniques for electronic resource management, and it really goes through the full life cycle of collections. So it starts with investigate, so you're investigating new resources, acquiring them, implementing them, and I would say maintaining them as well, because that's a big piece. Evaluation and review, canceling, replacing, and preservation. And I really felt that in the early years of the team around I joined it, we were really focused on investigate and acquire. And no wonder, because we had collection development librarians and we had acquisitions. But now by adding more pieces to the puzzle and reaching out beyond that, we're starting to look at the full life cycle. We're starting to add the collection management and the preservation. We're starting to add the analysis. We're starting to communicate and market and promote our resources. And we use this as a model, so we talk about that's a terms thing. So when we realize we run into a problem that we're not solving, we say, oh, that's a terms thing, we try to work that through. And it's been really a helpful framework for people. Also has been helpful is co-location. Through those major renovations, one very good thing that came out of it is all of the collections and content team is now co-located. And that makes a huge difference when you can walk across the hall and talk to someone and build those teams and build build camaraderie, build collegiality, and better understanding of what's going on. So you're not, on a different floor fuming about why, that e-resource package hasn't, isn't available in the catalog. You can actually have a conversation about it and remedy the issue. We also had a revised team mandate where we're expanding beyond collection development, talking about open access and moving into other areas in assessment. And a revised collection policy. So in order to deal with some of our collection management issues, we really started thinking about our collection, even though our research library is a collection of record, what do we want to keep in the long term, and a collection of use. What are we going to keep for now as long as it's usable, but after a certain time, we need to realize that maybe interlibrary on there are other ways of getting that content, and to work in that way. So that's another framework or model that's helped us to achieve where we want to go, or at least started us on the path. We have steering team meetings with all the professionals and librarians, and we've also held yearly retreats, which has been really helpful where we can really talk about it. I'm very lucky, the people that I work with, we have a high trust factor, we've worked together for a while, and I think people really do listen, and I think that's been really helpful for us. So what it's enabled us to do is to move towards some of our strategic directions. So we put aside 1% of our acquisitions budget for open access resources. So for us, that's about 80,000. It could be advocacy, it could be tools, infrastructure, or content. So we move towards that. Trying to think what else here. We do now review our resources on a regular basis. So we do decide to cancel things, not because we can't afford them, but because there's something better to buy. So we're doing more evidence-based as well. We're optimizing the access and discovery. We're moving into talking about making more things that are open, available through our discovery systems. Working with course reserves to let faculty know what we already have rather than buying new things and that sort of thing. So it really has enabled us to move forward as a team. There's still a lot of challenges, and Samuel and I share one of those challenges in that in Ontario, 14 schools are going together and a library services platform is going to be shared. So I think these workflows and this framework is going to be really helpful in thinking about, okay, what does our work look like in this different way where we'll be using the different systems. Anyway, I'm going to stop there, and if you have any questions at the end, let me know. Doing pretty good. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to Denise's slides briefly. I won't try to do them justice. But Denise is from the University of Alberta. That's a campus community of 38,000 students. They have 18 faculties and 5 campuses. They're the second largest research library in Canada. Their collections were previously distributed. In 2014, they really changed their monograph acquisitions they don't do any more title by title. And Denise talked about that at Charleston already, so she wasn't going to spend much time on that. They struck a working group in 2015 to look at how collections should be structured. And in April 2016, they moved on to creating a new collection strategies unit. And this is in our slides that will be available. So basically, they have 4 librarians here. She said it took a long time. It took about a year and a half to get all these pieces in place. And that sort of reflects the Guelph experience too. We really had a lot of changes. So there's a coordinator of collection strategies, and then there's 4 collections librarians. And those 4 librarians are responsible for all the subject areas. 2 take responsibility for the science and health areas, the other 2 for social sciences, businesses, and so on. 2 librarians focus on licensing and e-resource management. 1 focuses on books, and 1 on the management of physical collections. But they all have to have broad knowledge, which is only 4 of them, so they have to be able to cover each other. And these are some of the challenges and opportunities that she identified through the process, and that it is ongoing. She's stressing the importance of incremental change, transparency, and communication throughout the process, which I think any time you're doing change is quite important. So now I'm going to turn it over to Samuel to talk about the Western experience.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry, just 1 second here. Okay. All right, so I'm here to talk about Western's experience, and I think Western brings a little bit of a unique perspective. So it's good that we had all 3 perspectives shared here. So Guelph moved from the liaison model to a fully functional model, whereas Alberta still has a liaison structure, but they do team-based collections. Alberta, though, has professional schools, a medical school, as does Western. So Western also moved to that fully functional model, but with the professional schools, which presents a very, I think, unique challenge. Okay, so I'll present Western's experience, but I also just want to take a quick moment to thank ProQuest for a sponsorship. I wouldn't be able to be here today presenting without that, so thank you, ProQuest. Okay, so Western's experience. So Western is what I would consider a medium-sized institution, 37,000 FTE, but we do, again, have very strong PhD programs, a School of Medicine, business, law, education, etc. So we have about 10 libraries in total. And the scope of our organizational renewal was quite large, and I think the time that it took to get to where we are today reflects that. So we've been talking about organizational renewal for 5 years now, and ask anyone at Western, we're tired of talking about it, so it's kind of ironic that here I am talking to you about it today, but I'm happy to share it. So we've been talking about organizational renewal for a long time, and the final model that we developed was actually a little bit different than where we ultimately landed. So reflecting the strength of our professional schools, we thought a hybrid approach would work best. So how that looks is you would have functional perspectives within each library location. So for example, in the law library, you would have folks focused on collections, teaching, research, and user experience. And you would have that functional perspective at each location. And that's actually not where we ultimately landed. We have now adopted a fully functional model. Plus, we have what we call disciplinary coordinators. So that's kind of an addition to the model that we hope helps facilitate that communication between, in particular, those professional schools. So hopefully that makes sense. It probably is a little bit confusing, and we can talk about it later in the questions if it doesn't. Okay, so this is what our organizational model looks like, at least in the collections team. So as opposed to the model at Guelph, where Pam is responsible for metadata and acquisitions, I'm not. I'm only responsible for 5 collections librarians and 1 library assistant. So we're much more, I see that as an advantage because I'm able to focus much more closely on my team. Okay, so what I'm hoping to share here in the next few minutes, Western is the new kid on the block in terms of organizational renewal. We've only been at this for about 6 months. So whereas Guelph has been in the new model for about 10 years, we've only adopted it for 6 months. So I'm hoping to give you some fresh perspectives and challenges as well. So in terms of first steps, These were the first steps that I took about a year ago in preparation for moving to this new model of how we approach collections. So number one was network and consult with other libraries. And I remember talking to Pam extensively about, team-based collections, and also networking with folks at Charleston last year about team-based collections. Now again, keep in mind that the difference is we're not just doing team-based collections. We've flipped the complete liaison model, so it is, I think, quite unique. Number two, form a healthy team culture. I gave this presentation to my team, and they laughed at this point because we spent so much time on team building activities, those types of things. But reflecting back, that was probably the most helpful piece in moving forward. Not so much focusing on professional development and the skills, but it was the soft skills, just working together, that really has helped us be successful. Inventory activities. So what I mean by that is just building an awareness of what other people do. And by building that awareness, it has helped create empathy within the team. So very helpful again. Develop a short-term plan for covering collections areas. So if you are looking to move to this new model or a similar model, the easiest way to transition is probably to adopt a pseudo liaison model. And that is what we've done, at least in the short term. So we have one person for STEM, one person for medical, one person for arts and humanities, social sciences, etc. So that's really helped kind of make it more of an evolution than just flipping the switch. And approve the approvals. So what I mean by that is having an approval plan that works and trusting it. And that feeds into my next step of let it go. So I've been singing Frozen for the past year because there is elements still within the team of, well, we don't really trust the approval plan. It works to a reasonable degree, but we're really, hesitant to actually trust the approval plan. And what we've acknowledged as a team is there will be some errors. It's not perfect, but in order for us to move forward and focus on the larger issues, we need to let some things go. So trusting the approval plan is really important. Another strategy that helps make this team-based collections work is an evidence-based perspective, or creating the assessment culture that Pam talked about. Very, very important to not just collect usage stats, but to use them. And to not just have the usage stats kind of validate your preconceived notions of a resource, but actually let some of those trends drive your decision making. So that's been a process. Demand-driven acquisitions, I think, is really important. Using DDA is essential, but also not just DDA in the sense of demand-driven acquisitions, but also acquiring textbooks more systematically. That's been tremendously helpful. And also making sure the resource request form, or that's what we call a recommended purchase form, works well. Very important way of driving acquisitions. And again, similar to what Pam said, pivoting from operational thinking to strategic thinking. So focusing less on selection and more on programs. And lastly, some pain points. So these are some paraphrased pieces of feedback that I got that I'll just read, and feel free to ask me if you have questions about what I've been read. How can we accurately acquire material for our users without having any interaction with them? The disciplinary coordinator role is only 25% of the colleague's role. So this is the main point of feedback that we get is, well, right now we can make this model work because we have some institutional memory of the liaison function, but in 5-10 years, how am I going to know what my users want? Secondly, I was confident and capable in my old role, and now many of my skills are no longer applicable. This is tough. So I hear that quite often. Working with like-minded collections-focused colleagues is wonderful, but it's difficult not being co-located in the same building. So co-location, very important. Many of the automated processes and strategies are not very applicable to certain subject areas. in particular, the professional libraries, those faculties may suffer in the new model. And that's probably our biggest challenge moving forward, is continuing to figure out how we can serve our law library, our business school, our medical school, to a degree that meets their expectations. Okay, common themes. So stitching together the three experiences into some common themes. Number one, thinking holistically and strategically instead of operationally. We've all experienced that at each institution. Communication is key. So communication not just between the new collections team and the other areas in the library, but also how do you communicate decisions out externally to faculties, but then how do you communicate changes in the faculties into your new team without those same liaison connections. Developing an assessment culture, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but hugely important. And just, it takes time. It takes time and patience, as Pam showed. Guelph has been at it for 9 years, and things are still developing. I'm being very patient 6 months in, but it definitely requires time and patience. And I believe that is it for the presentation. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. Okay. Questions? Yes?
So I have a question about the liaison, especially, well, but it probably applies to Western as well. You've got, if the liaisons to those certain subjects areas are focused on collection liaison. How do the instructional librarians do they also liaise so that departments, say the business or social sciences or whatever, would have two different librarians to contact based on whether they're talking collections or instruction, and how do the faculty? Like, I feel like my faculty is going to meet because I'm their person, no matter what, if it's collections, if it's instruction, whatever. Whereas I'm wondering if that confuses them if there's more than one person.
Yeah, so I'm just going to recap the video. Yeah, so the question is, if you have a liaison librarian, you're the sole contact for a faculty or department. But if you have somebody different doing information literacy and doing collections, who's the contact? That's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, that is difficult, right? And we're still struggling with that in some ways. It's interesting because Samuel mentioned disciplinary, how did you call them?
Disciplinary
Coordinators. We've talked about having disciplinary clusters, in fact, in our strategic priorities going forward. And then we talked about maybe rotating who that is, and then they can triage. So we talk a lot about triage models in terms of reference and all other ways, but the faculty will go to the person they know.
Yeah.
And they're not going to search your website to find the right person. And frankly, most of our websites are terrible, so it's kind of hard to find the right person. So it is an identified issue, and we're still struggling with it, to be honest.
And just briefly, from Western's perspective, yeah, the disciplinary coordinator is supposed to fill that role, be that first point of contact, but we're also trying to encourage folks to connect with teams instead of people. So group values. Whether that works or not, sir.
Just as a follow-up question to what is the relationship between these collection collections librarians and reference and social librarians? What is the relationship between the two?
Between the collections librarians and what was it?
And reference and instructional librarians.
Oh, reference. Okay. Yeah, so the question is, what's the relationship between collections, librarians, reference, and instructional? For us, that's something that also has been a bit of an issue, and it's been kind of one-on-one. Because in every team, you almost get that mini liaison where you have the science person and you have the social science person. So it depends on how well those folks have sort of developed their relationship and work together. In some cases, better than others. So it's not like it hasn't been happening, but we're trying to formalize that a bit more by creating these discipline clusters and having that conversation. One thing we have done is when we've been working through our quality assurance process, so we're mandated by the Ontario government to review programs every 8 years now. And that used to be purely, the library has a role in that. And it used to be purely collections. Can the library support the collections? Well, that's changed dramatically, and the kind of questions that we get has changed dramatically. So now we talk as much about the services that we offer in terms of, all kinds of things, information literacy, learning services, we have writing services in the library, early career researchers. And by going through that process and inviting those folks in to contribute to those reports as we review programs, we're building those relationships, and we're also building understanding. So the collections librarians take the lead on that project. So if we're reviewing the biological sciences program, our sciences librarian will take the lead, they'll get the information from the other librarians that work in the sciences, and so I think we're building a lot of bridges that way. And as newer people come on, they're like, oh, okay, I need to talk to you and you on a regular basis, and they informally set up meetings to do so every month or every couple of months. So we're trying to make more structure around that. So it's not that it's not happening, but we don't have formal pathways for it to happen.
Yeah, and just really briefly, one identified challenge in our previous model was that we had silos. So we had silos with the science library and arts and humanities library and our various professional libraries. And the new model is supposed to kind of bridge those silos, but then there's going to be new silos created between the functional teams, right? So what we're looking at now, and this is in active development, is creating committees that cross the functional teams. I don't really know how that looks quite yet, but that's one strategy we're implementing to try and bridge those gaps. A new committee structure. Sorry, I think there was a few questions, yeah, over there first.
Were the reorganizations specific to collections alone, or were they part of a broader library-wide?
Right. So at Guelph and Western, it was a library-wide restructuring, so we kind of blew up the liaison model. Whereas at Alberta, they did not. They retained the liaison model, but they have a team for collections. Is that fair, Pam? Good question. Yeah, Miguel?
Yeah, our sense is if you had asked faculty what they are most interested in, our number one issue is collections across the disciplines. So
Agreed.
I'm curious, what feedback have you heard from faculty? Have you gotten any?
So for the recording, the question is, faculty often view collections as the most important element of the library's work, so aren't they concerned? In Western's case, yes, they're very concerned. And certain faculties are more concerned than others. For example, our medical school, our law school, very concerned because they've had what I'll probably call, or what we call a boutique level of service, whereas other faculties have not. So yes, they're very concerned. How we've been communicating and what is yet to actually see, but it is that moving to this new model will allow us to hopefully provide better service. It's just in a different way. So previously, in terms of how collections decisions were made, it was very different across the libraries, and there wasn't really processes in place to ensure that we were collecting in an equitable way. And so now we hopefully will be able to, but for certain faculties that will mean less. So it's a challenge.
Yeah. It's a little hard for me to speak to because I wasn't there right after the organizational renewal. But I think my perspective is a little bit different because I think in the liaison model, it really depended on how knowledgeable and how much outreach the particular liaison did for that department. So some departments would think, well, I'm not getting the right service I got before, and some maybe not as much because that's just the nature of liaison work, which is why in both cases we blew it up, was because it tended to be uneven and people couldn't be good at everything. It's a really challenging model. I think at Guelph we're fortunate we've had good budgetary support, and we do a lot of purchasing consortially. So Canada has a national consortium that has all the big deals. We have a great provincial consortium in Ontario that purchases a lot. We've had a healthy budget. We haven't had to cut monographs very much. So I think in ways that, we're not getting a lot of requests. Certainly, the history faculty that really use the monographs, and so they found the people they need to talk to, and they talk to them, and we buy the stuff. So I think there was concern at the beginning, but I wasn't there, so I can't speak to that as much. But I'm not hearing a lot about it now. I'm feeling like, but I agree with you. I mean, we did the Ithaca faculty study not too long ago. What do faculty think is important? That you buy the stuff we need. way above everything else and all these emerging services we're developing. But I feel like we're doing a pretty good job, but part of the thing is we don't have as much contact, so we're not sure. So, but I think we're in a bit of a very fortunate position.
That was really my question.
Okay.
I'm trying to wrap my head around these various strategies, especially with in the case of Western. One thing that I imagine might help me is could you characterize your collections? I mean, it seems print heavy to me, or maybe I'm wrong. With a mention of an approval plan.
Right. We do still collect. I would say Western is a relatively traditional library, but we are moving more towards e-preferred. We have a very robust DDA program. So it seems very print-based. Well, I think my focus on this presentation might have been heavily geared towards print, just because that has been one of the pain points, particularly at the professional libraries. And I'm speaking mostly to our law library. A lot of that material is not available electronically, and it's difficult to acquire in automated means. So that is a current challenge that is an unresolved challenge, and that's kind of why I try highlighting that. Because for arts and humanities, for STEM for the most part, monograph acquisitions, if you have a DDA plan that's running well, we use Oasis for our approval plans, it's almost seamless. But for those professional libraries, that's where a lot of time is still being consumed as selectors instead of strategic makers.
Yeah, I have a question specifically about Western in terms of reliance on approval plans, DDA, and I guess purchase requests. So one of the issues that we have at our library, we're a much smaller library, much smaller, but that some of the librarians don't want to, the subject librarians don't necessarily want to rely upon the approval plan. They don't particularly like DDA, and I try to get them to continuously take a look at the approval plan, make sure that it's at a good level as to where they want it, and to understand more about the DDA, and also for us to maybe open it up, the request forms to students, because currently it's not, it's only for faculty.
Yeah.
And I think we're doing a disservice there. But how did you talk to your librarians to get them to come and look at it from that perspective?
I'm trying to think of a way of saying this diplomatically, and I'm struggling. I think in the liaison model, so I'll step back a little bit. My previous role to being the head of this team was the e-resources librarian, so obviously I bring that perspective. And in my previous role, I had the opportunity of working with 30 or 40 collections librarians who all had different perspectives, and trying to facilitate that was really difficult. And I think one of the opportunities of this model is, okay, we're flipping the model, and the only way we're going to be able to make team-based collections work with a group of 5 librarians is to rely on these methods. So the model almost forced the transition to those strategies. I think the strategies were identified as being good strategies and ones we wanted to move towards. But if we were to retain the old liaison model, it would have been more difficult to fully integrate those strategies into that system. So the new model almost facilitates and forces those perspectives.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was in a publisher librarian meeting yesterday. We talked a little bit about this, but I think people that are hanging their professional identity on being a bibliographer and having deep subject knowledge, this is the toughest. And there's no question about that. That is really hard, but in order for the library to move in the new strategic directions, supporting research and scholarship and digital humanities and all this, it unfortunately is a reality that we have to work with. We're trying to work with the best with that we can. But yeah, it is a tough one. I think it's the same with catalogers and, bringing in changes to copy cataloging and getting the records in. I mean, you're taking something that people valued as part of their professional identity. That's what they signed up for, and it's not that tough. And there isn't an easy answer to that one. Absolutely not. So I think you can be empathetic and recognize that point of view, but you can't support it because it's not sustainable, and you're not going to get the work done that you need to get done. So it's a tough one. Got it out. I think we're out of time. We're going to end on that note. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Our contact information is there, so.